Hello, and thank you for your interest in Hreflang Builder. This video will give you an overview of the solution and its key features. Hreflang Builder was developed for the complexities of multinational companies that require an automated and scalable solution for Hreflang attributes using Hreflang XML sitemaps. Hreflang Builder is the only Hreflang solution that can automatically import URLs from multiple sources, map alternates, generate valid Hreflang XML sitemaps, and deploy them directly to a server. To use this solution, we require 4 elements. The first being a URL source. This can be from multiple sources. Number 2, we need to understand your domain, country, and language structure. Basically, how is each market website set up? We need to apply one of the multiple rules to map alternate URLs to help identify them. And lastly, we need a destination for the final XML sitemaps. In terms of importing URLs and URL sources, majority of people use XML sitemaps that are created by their content management system. We can either pull in the individual XML sitemaps, or if you have them in an index file, we can import that. You can append a list from CSV or Excel. These are typically URLs not yet in another source, typically for promotions like Black Friday, or if you're doing a site migration, they may not already be in the sitemap. And then the other option is to use one of the SEO diagnostic tools via an API, Lumar, which is formerly DeepCrawl, OnCrawl, Content King. If you're already using a tool like Screaming Frog, there is a method using their scheduler, saving the XML sitemap output to Dropbox, and you can import it in just like a regular sitemap. The goal is to get as many URLs as possible. Number 2, we want as many valid URLs. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're covering as many of the markets as you have as easily as possible. The second step we mentioned was understanding the domain structure, and the reason we need to do this is because the way we do our mapping is based on a URI. But if we pull in a bunch of XML sitemaps or a feed from let's say Lumar or OnCrawl, we need a way to basically separate the URLs into their respective markets. Now, if you have a consistent structure, where it's your site / country language and then the page, or some combination of that that's repeatable across all the markets, you can just simply select that in the selector. If you have multiple formats, and most of our clients have at least 3 different formats of subdomains, CCTLDs, global TLDs like a .com, and using folders of various combinations, we can work with you to create a custom regex file that basically separates all of the URLs into their respective projects. And the reason, as I said, we do this is because we want to take the URI or the piece after the domain and use it to match. The idea is if you're using a similar structure on all the markets, then we can map that automatically. If you don't have that and it varies, like localized URLs or use different names or different product IDs, then we need to look at using one of our mapping functions. We currently have 40 different rules or methods we use for mapping alternate URLs. The easiest and the default is anything that's an exact match URI. As we mentioned previously, that will get mapped automatically. We can use wildcard rules around patterns. We'll talk about a couple of those. And we have a more detailed video about the different mapping methods. But using wildcard rules allows us to say everything that ends in a particular format. Like if you're using Salesforce Commerce Cloud, a lot of them end in a C and then a number, or a P and a number to represent the product or category. Others will use a specific ID or a specific product name. If you have any of those, then we can use a wildcard to say basically anything that ends in C or P with the same number are mapped to each other. You can have literal rules that URI A is equal to URI B, and then URI B is equal to URI C. We can extract a variable from a JavaScript or analytics tags. Many people will track their global performance. Also, we can pull it in from product SKU or meta tag. Now, in a perfect scenario, when we import your URLs and if you have a consistent format, your mapping table will look like this. It will be green with a plus sign indicating the two conditions were met, that there was a URL for that market, and two, it did match either automatically or one of the rules that you've preloaded into the system. If it looks like this, if your mapping file looks like this, where green, same thing, means there is a URL and there is a match, where red means we either don't have a URL or it's not mapped. This is why many of our users will use multiple sources for URLs, because we find in many cases as many as 40 to 60% of the URLs that are actually live on your website are not actually in your XML sitemaps produced by your content management system. So if you once you load your URL sources and your mapping file looks like this, then we can work with you, or you can follow our guidelines to try to map some of these. So as we were talking about, if you have a SKU or product ID, in this case, all of these end in dash, a letter number combination. They're all the same despite the URL being translated. Now, as I mentioned previously, most people, when they use Salesforce Commerce Cloud, this P will be at the end. And so it's very easy to, that's the easiest one, almost a default one. We can pick up a wildcard saying P plus a common SKU. In this case, we can write one that says dash, some combination of letters and numbers, .html, that matches. So all of these, because they do have the same ID, can be matched. This example here, we have two different ones. Plus we have some that don't have a product ID in them. This is a case where we would need to use a wildcard, or in this case in row 6, you can see that this is match equal to this. Now, unlike pretty much every other Hreflang tool that's out there, most of them require you to have neat little columns for every market. So if you have 50 market websites, you have to put all 50 of them in columns, and then it has to be the same row going across. And that's because they're simply saying everything in this row, wrap it into a country language tag and deploy it either as a block or as a sitemap. In our case, if you have 10 markets that use, in this case, men's boots, we're able to map those automatically because they're exactly the same. And we can say those 10 with men's boots are equal to 2 with men boots, or with a slash, without a slash, or if you throw in German or French, localized. As long as we have one of the variations, this is that A equals B, then B equals C type rule. As you can see here, these are examples where someone has had these parameters like a L or a C or a P, but then had regional variations. So this is an example of both wildcards as well as wildcards plus variations. So this is showing basically 4 or 5 of these variations are wrapped up in one. Now, if you're tracking performance globally and you use a global product SKU, so many big e-commerce companies that want to understand, hey, how many of these jackets or what's the performance on my web page in each of the market for a particular product, they will have a global SKU. Now notice the product SKU is different. The picture is exactly the same. The material ID, because we find many people either source from a different market, they have different sizes. There's some reason why they may need to have a different product ID because it's technically a different product, but at the end it's the same product globally. So if you have this, either we can extract that. This is an example where we just put in what it is, global product SKU. We can extract that number, and any URL that we encounter will have that. Now we can either extract this when we do a quality check on the URL and pull this in, but if you're using like OnCrawl, in OnCrawl you can actually set an extraction regex rule, and it will pull this out and we can pull that in through API. It just eliminates the need for us to have to ping the page. So any of these can work for you. Like I said, there's 40 of these. We can work with you to figure out which one is the easiest and most automated. And worst case, we have a fallback of where we can list the URI and map it somewhat manually, but trying to use as much automation as possible. Another problem people run into is they have regional sites. So we have an APAC site, we have a LATAM site. In this case, we have a Middle East Arabic site. And this, you have two options. So there is no region tag in Hreflang. There's only country, a region tied to a language. So it's not like we can have the Middle East as a region. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make, is they try to assign like ME, the country code ME for Middle East. Say I want Arabic, and it doesn't work that way. You have two options. You can either assign a regional site to a language. In this case, option 2 is we can assign the Middle East Arabic site to Arabic language. Or B, Google specifically has given us the option, not us literally, but cites the option to say my Middle East Arabic regional site is actually applicable to multiple. Within Hreflang Builder, you simply can click the Global Arabic, for example. That's the default setting, and say clone it to Bahrain and Egypt and Iraq, any market within that region. Same thing happens in Latin America. Or if you have an English language website for APAC, you can say it's Singapore and Malaysia and Australia. So this is a very, very powerful feature. And what it does then is it allows us to basically take that same URL but then attribute it to a specific market within that region. Then the system, once it's done its mapping, it will generate a Hreflang XML for each market. And this is the biggest benefit of using Hreflang, is because within a cluster, all of them are listed. Now, with tags, you have to, the search engine must visit every one. So if we have 10 markets, it has to visit all 10 and find the reciprocating block within that. This basically eliminates the need to visit every one of your websites. This is why large websites that have many market versions opt for Hreflang XML. So we produce one of these. We have two options. We can produce one, and this is good if you have a smaller multinational website, or, and what the default is, we produce one XML for each market with all the right tagging and reciprocations. Then you have complete control over this. You can create a naming. You can tell it where it's going to be to create an index file. You can decide to zip it or not zip it. You can have custom naming down to the individual XML level as well as the index level. And the last step is, once we've produced that, we need a way to get it to you. So if you don't have storage set up now, then we can send it to you as a zip file and as a link. You can download it, unzip it, and get the developers to do it. Now, the more complex your web infrastructure is, the more complex your setup is going to be. And so we have a number of clients that either will do one of two things. They'll create a cloud storage, either in Azure or AWS. We upload to that, and then they do a reverse proxy to either a central location or multiple locations. The second option is we can upload to a dedicated. So we have some people that will call it, mycompanyxml.com, and then especially those in CPG or FMCG. We call them portfolio companies. They have multiple brands, and if they're managing centrally, they'll often have a dedicated domain like this, create a project folder for each brand, and then we can upload the files to that. Using cross-domain verification in Search Console, Google will allow you to manage everything centrally. So again, either of these three options, all dependent on your needs, your desire, your level of security, and more importantly, the complexity of your setup. So that was a quick overview of Hreflang Builder, and want to thank you for your time. If you'd like to see a demo, a working demo, please fill out our contact form. Give us, your domain or a couple domains. Let us know, and then we can set that up. You can actually see your domain working. Or feel free to go ahead and sign up and get started. Also check out our other videos we have one on setting up, as well as some of the details of mapping. So thanks again for your interest, and we look forward to working with you.